Okay, some of you guys are asking for a tutorial on how to do a Dyson dodecahedron map style in Inkarnate. So I thought I'd show you guys my approach to it and what I was able to figure out with it. This is an example of the kind of result that you can get using this method, which is basically a mashup of like a Dyson style and Kelsey's style in the different shadow dark maps that she's done. So how this is achieved is we use textures. Well, there's two ways to do it. One is, and this map has both in it. One is to use the textures that Inkarnate has. And basically I've set up some custom textures that I've imported. And there's a few different ones we use. There's basically a crosshatch alpha, the tiles, and then an alpha version of the tiles. And basically just setting up the background to use those. You can go in and just start using the shovel to start digging out terrain, which is what I did for these caves. And that gives a pretty good result, except that I kind of hate this outline, but it looked better with it than without it, in my opinion, so I left it. The main reason I don't like it is it's not directional like the shadows on the walls. The other method is you can use shapes to do it. And the nice thing about that is you can reposition them if you need to, if you make a mistake. Like this is a copy of a dungeon from a book, and I made a mistake in some of the rooms that were too low, and I only realized it when I was down here, and then I came back up and I could just move all of these up without having to do too much adjustment. So that is a big advantage of the shapes. The other thing I like about the shapes is it's a lot easier to do these diagonal lines, I found, using shapes than it is to try and paint them with the shovel tool. And there's quite a lot of diagonal shapes in this map, so it was a good method to use. But you could do the whole map if you were just doing kind of really simple room shapes. You could just paint the whole thing in, which would be pretty fast, because the problem with the shapes is that you do have to keep adjusting the texture offsets to get everything to line up. Whereas painting it in, you just have to really set that up once, and then it'll be consistent for everywhere on the map. Anyway, that's the example. I'll show you what it actually looks like to work with this. So let me make a new map. You can pick anything. I chose watercolor just because I thought that there might be a way to use some of the objects in there, which I did end up using a couple in that other map. You could probably also use parchment just because it's got some of the base textures that you'll want, but I don't think it really matters. You can access whatever you need anyway. I'll just go with watercolor because that's what I did last time. And then I'll just pick something. So to start with, we'll want to do some setup. So the first thing that we'll do is we'll want to pick basically a white. You could also just use like any parchment color if you don't want to do pure black and white, which is another kind of style that Dyson does. So if we just go to parchment, and I think I would pick something like this, we can fill that in as a starting point. But if you really want it white, I just put the brightness right up so we get a pure white. So this is going to be the background, which will be the dirt, which will end up being the crosshatch when we're finished. We don't want to fill it with crosshatch because we only want to paint them around the edges. So this is starting for that. And then we want to set up the foreground. So let me just paint that in. I don't know if that worked. Okay, it didn't. We'll just do it the slow way. So that's the default foreground. So what we'll want to do is I'll share these textures that I made. Just real quickly on like where these come from. This is actually from Dyson Maps. I just sampled it from one of his maps. Just found an area and cut it out and made it tile. And then the crosshatch is from this Paddy Wolf, who's done like a whole blotch of ink crosshatch that's free to use. I took this and just edited it in like a photo app to make it tiling, so it's a tiling texture, and then imported those and made it an alpha as well. So one thing we'll want to do when setting up this grid, the tiles, is we want to make sure it lines up with the grid we'll be using in the app. So I'll turn the grid on, and then if I just fill that now, oh, hang on, that was the wrong foreground, and fill, we'll see that's wrong by default. We need to play with the texture scale. It's a little hard to see. Okay, that's pretty good. A lot of trial and error. 204.5 seems to be the magic number for this particular grid scale. So that'll get it sitting on the scale, so we don't have to worry about that anymore. We can turn that off. So that is the texture set up for our foreground. So now we can go back to here and just block in all of the background. Like that. And then if we paint, say we use this, and we start painting rooms in, we will have the tiles already there. I think I prefer using... The other thing that can be handy is to turn snap to grid on. So that way we're working in whole units. You can see as well there's a preview of the room size, which is very handy. So this says 6 by 6. So this will give us our room. By default, the walls aren't exactly what we want to match that style. So what I do is come in and edit the mask effects. I want to take out the ripples. We want to make sure that we don't need outer shadows. We want the inner shadows to not be blurred. And we want them to be thicker than that. That gets us quite close to that kind of like pen appearance. The stroke, we generally want to be thicker as well. This depends on your map size, how thick you want it, but you do want it to be the thickest pen in the whole hierarchy of different pen widths. Dyson's very good at using different pen widths to mark out details. So you can see that the walls are quite thick, and then the hatches are a little bit thinner, and then the floors are very thin. Using that pen hierarchy is really important. You can see the water here, like the ripples are kind of the thinnest pen. If you just use the same thickness for everything, it becomes really muddy and really hard to read the map. So the trick is to pay attention to details like that. So this should be quite thick. You can even go a bit heavier than that if you really want to go crazy. I prefer it to be pretty thick. So that is the basic setup there. For getting the walls to have the crosshatch, we need to paint in the backgrounds. and pick the crosshatch texture, and then we'll want to make sure that it's about the right size. So maybe we'll say, yeah, 415. That might be a little big, 400, like that. And then we don't want to use a soft edge because hatching is hard edged. The whole point is that the hatches are supposed to create the gradient or the softening effect. So we don't want to use the circle. We want to use something like this, the varied edge. And then we should be able to just start painting around like that. We can play around with the roughness to get the kind of variety that we want. That's a little bit of trial and error. We can always come in and knock some away again. I would recommend not painting the hatches in until you've done your layout, and then you can go in and do those. That's the basic idea for using the shovel to paint things in. So, you can just sort of go around and keep adding stuff. You can paint other shapes in, but the problem I have is that you can't really adjust this after the fact. If I need to change this circle, I've got to go and basically delete it and repaint it and all that kind of stuff. So it really depends on what you're going for. The other thing as well is that we can come in here and say we want to make caves. I think this really is the best tool for that. We could make like a rough thing through here. Maybe there's a breakthrough in the wall. And maybe it joins here. And you start to just paint stuff in, and it gives us what we want. And then when we're happy, we can just go in and paint along the edges to get that nice crosshatch look we want. I have to finish it now. So you can go that far. That's the basic layout stuff using painting. I'll show you what it looks like with shapes. I'm a big fan of shapes and lines. I think they're a really good addition to Inkarnate. But what that looks like is snap to grid. Maybe I want to do a bit of a weird shape. So maybe there's some kind of room out like this. It's got some lines on it like that. Once we have our shape, we can set it up. So the first thing we'll need to do is look at paths and get a nice black line. And we'll want to make sure that it's of a similar thickness to what we're using for the terrain. So we can just adjust it here. And then we want to set up a fill, a texture fill, and use our custom tile texture. And then we can adjust that in here. No, not in there. It's right here. So we need to get this to the right scale as well, which maybe that is the same as before, so 204.5. Then we will need to adjust the offsets, and I've picked a particularly difficult shape here. Normally it'll be a lot closer if you've just got a simple rectangle. there's definitely something off with the scale. Maybe it's just my shape. Well, this is a good opportunity to show you why I like shapes. I can come in, maybe if I turn the grid on, the opacity down a little bit. Shapes let you adjust things, so I can come in and start fixing the fact that this is off grid. I can put it on grid. Let's just reset this, see what we're dealing with. Yeah, I've found that multiples of 5 seem to be good at snapping it on. So now I can come out of the grid. Now we have our shape. The nice thing about the shape is that it will overwrite anything it's over. So that means I'm free to paint this in the background and the shape will just sit on top of it, which is really nice. And then we need to join it onto the terrain here, which we can use the door tool to do. And then they'll generally sit together. You'll notice that the shape doesn't have any shadows for the walls. So I'm still working out a good method for that. What I have been doing is something fairly manual, where I've just been painting the wall in that I want to have a shadow, and then setting up a shadow for it. So once again, no blur. And then we need an offset. About a 0.3, I think, is a good intensity. And then that will give us our shadow for the wall. Very manual. That is definitely a downside of the shapes. There may be a way to set this up where we don't need to do that. I'm still experimenting with that. So it does mean you need to just go around and paint all of those in. That's definitely a final step once you've locked in your layout and you're doing finishing touches and details on the dungeon. The other thing you can do is adding details. So a common one I guess we should look at is doors. So if I come in here and, well, actually what we can do is just edit the door that we have. Make that smaller. So there we have a doorway. To add a door, we just need to draw a box. We want it to be not snap. I found that 8 by 20, it was merging the shape. We need to turn that off so that it doesn't become part of the room. So 8 by 20 should be about right. And remember what I said about pen widths. This is a good time where we shouldn't be using such a thick stroke for that. So maybe we want to drop that down to 100. And then, yeah, that's a door. So the doors are very simple, and then I can just copy that. Maybe I want to put some other doors around the place. Maybe there's some double doors here or something like that. I can add a wall in here. Maybe here. It is actually filling these doors with the texture, which it's actually much better to just make sure it's a color. That way you won't get any weird internal artifacts. That's doors. The great thing about this map style is most stuff is just like really simple ink illustration. So you can just use combinations of the shape tool and the line tools to draw in what you need. So maybe I want to put in a pit trap. So I can just draw in this guy. My general sizes for the lines is 40 is your fine internal details, 100 is non-wall boundaries, so like this pit or the doors, and then your boundaries are 180 or higher for that, and that tends to give a good balance to the line weights. So once you've got this is good enough. You could certainly use this map, but there's always final touches just to kind of make it extra nice. So the ones that I tend to notice in Dyson's maps is the extra detail in the walls. All these little bits of debris and hatching just give a good amount of texture to the walls and a bit more visual interest to the map and make it look a bit more handcrafted. So to do that kind of thing, what I do is I just draw some very simple, if we go into the shape and do freehand shape and pick maybe 100, I'll just come in and kind of draw like a rock, and then I can shrink that down to whatever size I need. You'll notice that it looks about the same line thickness as these hatches. And then I can just copy that and paste it around. I can hold Control and scroll the mouse wheel to rotate it. I can hold Shift to scroll to change its size. And just sort of paste that around. If you want to change the thickness, you can just come in and do that if you want it to stand out a little bit more. So maybe I'll just bump these up a bit because I think they look a little bit too thin. I kind of want them to match what's here in these ground textures a little bit more. So maybe 100's a good amount. So you'll want to drop those in. Once again, you want to make sure that you've got a good balance of large, medium, and small details that are, so maybe I don't underestimate the very, very small ones. They add quite a lot. So just sort of adding them in around the place, just rotating them. That's the first step, adding all that in. I'm not going to do all of it. And then the other one is the hatches. So I just made a really simple hatch object. And we can just blow that up a little bit so we get it to a similar size. If I drop that now, you can see it overwrites stuff because it's got a white background. But we can just change the blend mode to darken or multiply, and then it won't do that. And it is a little dark, so I can just drop the opacity a little bit. I can also shrink it if I want, and then rotate it. And basically the same process as the rocks around the place. I can drop it down. You can also mirror it with these flipping tools. And with the combination of those things, you can really just use the one hatching object for the whole image, and you get enough variety out of it where it doesn't really look like it's repeating too much. So yeah, that can kind of just go around. Just take a look at Dyson's maps to see how they're able to kind of use all these in different ways to imply texture in the rocks. So maybe we want to create like a bit of a corner here, that kind of thing. So then you can go around and just do that, you know, particularly around all of these sort of natural edges. I think it works really well. When you do that, you're basically good. So the other thing is the numbers. So numbers and text, what I did for that, if we come in to key these rooms, put one here. This is really two objects. So one is the number, and then the other is the box. I make it the same size as one grid square. So like that, no stroke. And then we want to fill it with black. And then we can sit the number on top of it. The font that I used was, let me try and find it. Just Open Sans. You get a good, it fills the box very nicely. And I think I did 18 for the sizing. I guess it's going to depend on the resolution of your map. You do want to make sure that large numbers are going to fit in there. So like 35 or something like that. It needs to have enough room to fit in the box. The other thing we can play with is the line height to get it to sit within the shape. Then I recommend just grouping those. It's up to you, but I found there's trade-offs to grouping it. Grouping it means that you do need to, if I want to edit the text, I do have to double click it to go in and change the number. But it does mean that it's a lot easier to keep the number and the box together when you're moving it around. So I tend to prefer that. That is snapping a little weird to the thing. That's those keys. The other thing would be like points of interest in the room. So for that, if I drop, say that there's, say we want to have a key specifically about this pit trap. So say we call that A. The font I was using for that was fairly English. I think that worked quite well. No stroke. Let me find that. No outline, sorry. And then the fill black, bold. And then that stands out quite nicely. And once again, the letter shapes for this font are quite good at standing out and filling up the space. The other thing I like about Felt English for this purpose is that lowercase is still a capital glyph, which is very good. So you don't get any weird, like if you use a letter P or G or Y, they're all going to sit within that same basic square shape, which is really nice. Also quite good for Roman numerals, which can be quite common. So I, IV kind of thing. Looks quite nice, I think. Keeps it as a very good block. Yeah, so that's keying things. So another thing that can be handy is using Inkarnate's object library to add some details in a really quick way. This is very trial and error. I found most things don't end up looking like they match the style, but some things do. And mainly from the watercolor battle maps, there seems to be some serviceable things. So for instance, perhaps these roof vines we'd be able to use to represent something. So we can come in and shrink that down. Something like that. And we just need to remember that what we're trying to go for is something that looks like it could have been drawn with ink pens on white paper. So what we can do is play around with some of these settings. So if I pull these around a little bit, I can try and take out some of those midtones so that it looks more like ink. And then we can change the blend mode to luminosity. And we're starting to just get that kind of like, you know, 3-tone grayscale of like black ink, white paper, and then a gray highlighter pen. And yeah, you've just got to kind of play around with it. I also found that the coins can be quite useful for debris. So we might want to maybe show that there's debris from this breakthrough here. We do need to be careful about shadows. So we'll want to disable those. And once again, set the blend mode to luminosity, and then play around with the brightness here until we get something. Well, thanks for watching, guys. I hope you got something out of this, and I hope you're able to make some sweet maps.